Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. Now, if you didn't already know, around Halloween time, I love a good gothic ghost story. I've already covered several of the classics on this channel, including The Uninvited, The Innocents, The Haunting, and The Changeling. So to wrap up this month of spooky movies, I thought I'd cover a slightly more contemporary ghost story, one that is still very evocative of the classics I just mentioned. I'm talking about Alejandro Amenábar's 2001 film, The Others. The Others follows Grace Stewart, who lives in a large family estate out on the island of Jersey with her two children, Anne and Nicholas, while they are waiting for her husband to return from the Second World War. Born with a severe sensitivity to light, both of the children must be kept indoors and out of the light at all times. And after finding all the help to have mysteriously vanished overnight, 3 new servants arrive to take care of the home: a housekeeper, a maid, and a gardener. Soon her children start seeing other people moving around the house, and at first Grace dismisses this as just being their imagination. But after witnessing a few of these strange occurrences for herself, she begins to suspect that the house may be haunted, and works to uncover the truth of who these others may be. So as I mentioned, this film was directed by Alejandro Amenábar, who, as you have likely picked up, is not British, despite this being a very British film. Amenábar is in fact actually a Chilean director who grew up in Spain, and while growing up, he loved the old British ghost stories, like the Henry James tale The Turn of the Screw, which was later adapted into The Innocents by Jack Clayton, a film that clearly shares some strong similarities with The Others. Along with that, Peter Maddock's film The Changeling was a particular favorite of Amenábar's as well, and one which he claimed had a lot of influence on the plot of The Others, which he saw in a way as another version of the same story told through a different perspective. And though he had initially set the film in Chile, Amenábar was later advised to make this one into an English-speaking film, despite his previous 2 being in Spanish. A pretty big leap for the 29-year-old director, considering at the time he spoke no English. And eventually the translated script for The Others fell into the hands of none other than Tom Cruise, who was then in the process of making Vanilla Sky, a remake of Amenábar's previous film Open Your Eyes. And Cruise loved the script for The Others so much that he not only wanted to help produce the film, but he also gave the script to his then wife Nicole Kidman, who agreed to star in the film as well. And despite it being made in a language completely foreign from his own, Amenábar still considers this to be a very personal film. He apparently always wanted to make a horror film, but by the late 90s, he was already beginning to see how the current trends of horror, and more specifically ghost stories, were kind of drifting away from the quieter and more subtle films that made him love the genre in the first place. Instead, these new films were often much more like a roller coaster of scares, frequently loud and in your face. CGI effects were used heavily to bring the ghosts to life as they had never been seen before, but in doing so, much of the actual horror disappeared. No more did viewers have to fear the unknown, as it was right there in front of them, and with that dated 90s CGI, the longer you looked, the less frightening the monsters became. For the most part, horror films were becoming much more about periodically startling you than creating much of anything that stuck with you past the credits. And so Amenábar made The Others partially as a challenge to see if the approach taken by these classic films would still work on a modern audience. He adopts many of the tricks popularized back in the 1940s by Val Lewton, like using the darkness and shadows as places where the horror lives, while emphasizing an overall quieter sound design so that the loud noises and abrupt footsteps stand out that much more. And films like The Innocents come to play in how Amenábar makes great use out of the wide frame, placing things in the background which look like they could be human, but you are never quite sure. And when you do see something move, you struggle to discern if it is a ghost or just a passing breeze through the curtains. And while there still are a few jump scares sprinkled throughout, they are used much more effectively here, since they are just but one of the many tools in the director's toolbox, rather than them being his primary method for engaging the audience. And I just love how Amenábar plays with the light and shadow in this film, it being the one thing Grace can't have the children near, while in a way also being the answer to the film's mystery. The closer Grace gets to the truth of The Others, the brighter the film becomes. And believe it or not, there are a decent amount of CGI effects in this film. But unlike the more in-your-face examples I talked about earlier, like those seen in Jan de Bont's remake of The Haunting, here they are used quite sparingly and primarily just for adding fog and maybe a few set extensions here and there. And Amenábar was wise to use restraint with the CG in this film, as we can now see how even the big budget blockbusters that pioneered computer graphics in those days have since aged quite noticeably in recent years, especially with all the new 4K transfers that sharpen the visuals like never before. Meanwhile, the other still holds up incredibly well, and to be honest, I don't think I would have ever been able to tell the number of effect shots in this film had I not seen the breakdown of the bonus features. And as you probably know, one of the most important elements of any film is the music. And just like another horror director, John Carpenter, Amenábar actually composed the score for this film as well as being its writer and director. But unable to actually read or write music, he would instead improvise these songs along to the film on a computer using his electric keyboard. And there it would be recorded and later transcribed by a conductor to then be played and recorded by a full orchestra. And it's a very quiet and incidental score for the most part that doesn't bring much attention to itself while still doing an excellent job of helping further add to the emotions within the film when needed. But as great as all the direction, music, and story are in this film, another aspect of the others which really brings this film to the next level is all of the wonderful actors in it. Nicole Kidman, the star, gives one of the best performances of her career in this film. She does a great job of showing the internal conflict and grace between what she believes and what she is experiencing, while also having to stay optimistic for her children as they wait for her husband to return from the war, despite inside knowing that he is most likely dead. Kidman has since said that this was one of the most challenging roles of her career, and it certainly was at the time, as she apparently considered dropping out more than once. But those who have seen this film are certainly glad she didn't. And both of the kids played by Alakina Mann and James Bentley are incredible in this film as well. They are initially a bit evocative of the children from The Innocents, though they have decidedly different personalities from the ones in that film. But they both play off each other well, feeling very much like a real brother and sister, while also being able to hold their own in some really emotional scenes with Nicole Kidman. There's also a brief but welcome appearance by Christopher Eccleston, and the three servants who come to the manor, played by Fionnula Flanagan, Eric Sykes, and Elaine Cassidy, each give wonderful performances as well. Fionnula Flanagan probably being the most notable one in this story as Mrs. Mills, the housekeeper who watches over the children and becomes the one Grace really confides in as more and more strange things begin to happen around the house. But Eric Sykes, who was a very established British comedian and actor, also does a great job in this film, especially considering that by this time his hearing and eyesight had apparently deteriorated so much that he pretty much had to memorize his blocking through muscle memory, and would at times be guided around with a small light that would be shined at him off camera, making his nonchalant and easygoing performance in this film that much more impressive. So if you like to watch the others, you will have to pick up a physical copy for this one, as last I checked, it is unavailable to rent or buy or even stream anywhere. And oddly enough, despite the film's massive popularity upon its release, the film has only been available on a pretty expensive and hard to find Blu-ray, or a easier to find but almost just as expensive DVD. That is until this very month when the film underwent a 4K restoration. And so we now have a new 4K Blu-ray coming from Criterion just in time for Halloween. And so that's why I thought it would be a perfect time to talk about this contemporary classic. And I must say it's a fantastic and much needed restoration of the film. And it's accompanied by a ton of great bonus features, including a director's commentary, new interviews with the directors and lead cast members, as well as some archival bonus features made back when the film released, including that visual effects breakdown that I mentioned earlier, along with some great on-set footage of Amenábar directing the actors. Now I will mention that pretty much all of the bonus features on this disc are at least partially in Spanish, including a behind-the-scenes documentary where they actually dub over the English-speaking actors in Spanish, And though they are subtitled back to English, it is a little jarring to hear at first. But the documentary covers a lot of really fascinating aspects of the film's creation, so it's definitely worth checking out, even though it's certainly something to get used to. But now for my comment question, and I'm wondering, what is your favorite acting performance in a horror film? You know, despite often being considered a lesser genre, there have still been a number of iconic actors who have given quite memorable performances over the years. In fact, I think you could easily put Nicole Kidman up on that list for her work in this film as well. But I'm wondering, what are some of your favorites? Be sure to write them down in the comment section below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. That's it for this month of Halloween-themed movie recommendations, so be sure to check out my playlist if you want to hear me talk about some other great spooky films that I love. Otherwise, remember to keep watching movies and have a happy Halloween.